data centers are not going away. There are workloads that should live in private data centers for companies. That's not going to change. There are workloads that are most effective in a public cloud provider. That is also not going to change. We seem to get hung up as we start looking at all the industry rags and the people that, the people that measure their job success by the number of retweets. We think we're on some crazy hell-bent train for the cloud, and really we're on a pendulum. And for a lot of years, that pendulum was swung over into private data centers, and you had to, control your back 40 and go hug all your servers. And now we've swung way over to the public clouds, where we're putting workloads in the clouds that don't really belong there. And hopefully here in the next 24, 36, 48 months, we'll settle in the middle where we should have been the whole time, and understand that there are workloads that live in the data center because that's where the data has to be. And there are workloads that live in the cloud because we don't need to maintain the server for our front end website. It's hard to have a global data center footprint if you're not a company like Google. Those hyperscale cloud providers where when I need to present data globally with millisecond latency, that's hard to do on your own dime. So leveraging Google's network and that for those use cases makes sense. But it's all about data locality, and it's all about putting the right workload in the right place to make your team most effective. And that is what Anthos is all about. So Anthos is
Jamie?
Google's. Yeah,
Jamie,
go ahead.
One of the things you get started, and by the way, as the pendulum will settle in a reasonable spot in the world of technology, you can also be a political pundit in saying the pendulum has also swung different ways left and right in the past, and let's hope it settles in a more comfortable spot without so much vitriol on both sides.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it. I'm sure a lot of people were thinking it, but
Yeah.
it is true. Like that boring middle is where true success is most often found.
And I will tell you this,
And
the world of as I mentioned in my podcast a month or so, the world of on-prem is not going away.
no,
But I will tell you, the growth is coming where Intel, AMD, and others are selling their chipsets. The growth, though, is going to come, though, from expansion of either the co-location hosting partners or the GCPs and others. And so what we really want to stress here, and then I'll turn it back over to you, what my mission, quite honestly, at AngelBeat is helping everyone to understand these issues, what everyone has available, and then there's no fake news. This is all real news. It's real technical. It's real. You want to make data-driven decisions and then figure out what makes the most sense in your environment. Okay, back to you, Jamie.
That's dead on, right? Like, if it's do a cost benefit analysis, look at what fulfills your mission for a company and for your job, for your role. And if that means maintaining your own servers, then go maintain your own servers. If it doesn't, don't do it if you don't have to do it. It's a huge time sink. It's a huge resource sink. And if you don't have to do it, put those resources where you are fulfilling mission. That's the hard part. We tend to conflate hard work with doing it the right way. But anyway, let's get going. A little bit about me. I always like to throw an about slide. I work with customers at Google Cloud. I work specifically on GKE, our Kubernetes distribution, and Anthos. Excuse me, allergies are kicking in a little bit. Outside of work, I'm a big F1 racing fan. I like building things out of wood and fixing old tools. So I like doing pretty much anything that means not staring at a computer screen in my off hours. A little bit of an agenda. We're going to have to define Anthos because Anthos is some, ancient Greek word meaning flower or something along those lines. I'd have to go look it back up. And then we're going to expand pretty much on what Ron and I were just talking about where those workloads go, how you get there. Because the one thing that hurts the most is if you have to maintain your own servers and then you have to go out into a cloud, then you have to maintain two platforms. And each platform takes an entire brain's worth of knowledge. And then if you start using two clouds, well, then that's 3 brains worth of knowledge just to keep your stuff alive, where it used to take 1. So how do you have that single control plane that can manage workloads across multiple locations. That's the thing in the next 5 years. If you can do that effectively, you'll find success in IT. If your platform can live wherever it should live and you don't have to reinvent the control plane for that platform, you're going to find success. And that's why we're building Anthos. So defining the term, and that's where we got onto, you can really hang all of IT on this timeline of orchestration and isolation. We've been isolating processes and orchestrating processes since the first computers back in the 40s that filled up entire warehouses. And we keep building smaller and smaller blocks, smaller and smaller ways to isolate our processes, like Prashanto was showing. I'm a big Trilio fan, by the way. Prashanto, if you're still on, you guys are doing great work. We started out with the big mainframes, and then we went to the client server models, then went to virtual machines. Now we're down at containers, and there's some person out there somewhere thinking up the next thing. And I don't know if they're at Butte County Community College or out in Bangalore or wherever, but there's a thing after containers. So we're very much hung on a timeline that's not over. Containers are not an end state. But to get there, it has taken a lot of work. It's taking all those lessons learned. And I like to put this slide up there just to acknowledge that fact that we're in an evolutionary process. Containers are very much an evolution from virtualization, which are an evolution from bare metal, going all the way back. And evolution doesn't stop. Sometimes it takes turns that we don't anticipate, and some of that happened. Maybe Kubernetes is one of those for you, but it is very much an evolutionary path. And within that path, what we've done inside Google Cloud, and the one thing you can say about Google, and you can say many good things and bad things and have your opinions, but what Google does at its heart is we solve engineering problems at a global scale. We don't solve email for a company. We solve email for billions of users every day. We don't solve photo platforms for your family. We solve them for billions of users every day. We have 9 platforms, 9 applications, if I remember right, that have over 1 billion daily users. We solve global problems. And what we did with Anthos was we took those 2 ideas. We took that idea of we need to be effectively orchestrating our applications and effectively isolating our applications. And we need to solve that at the scale that Google solves problems. And we put our engineers in a room and we threw a bunch of pizza in there and a bunch of carbonated water. And what came out the other end was Anthos. So Anthos is, in a nutshell, the way Google thinks is the best way to deploy applications across multiple platforms for the foreseeable future, until something comes along that's better than Kubernetes, and then we'll have to rethink it all. But Anthos is our platform. It's all based on top of Kubernetes, which is probably a theme that everything on today's webinar is about. But Anthos runs everywhere. It runs inside Google Cloud, it runs on AWS, it runs on top of VMware, and it also runs on top of bare metal nodes. And Azure, I think Azure's coming soon, but I'm not 100% sure where it is in that where it is in that arc. But Anthos, you can run it pretty much anywhere. And what it gives you is a single orchestration control plane for all of your applications that are deployed using Kubernetes. The way we get there, the way we're able to give you a seamless experience, and obviously I say seamless with a little bit of an asterisk, because I can't deploy something inside GCP the exact same way I can deploy something on top of bare metal servers. So those initial steps are going to be a little different depending where the platform is, because Amazon is different than Google, is different than VMware, is different than bare metal. But once I get the operating system up and running, once I get the infrastructure done, everything that I interface with to manage my applications is completely software based. That means I'm abstracting the entirety of my application stack. And when you start looking in those details, a lot of people still aren't doing that 100%. And it's an important detail to think of, because that means once the ops team is done and that platform is handed over to the app dev team and the operator, once the engineers are done, it's handed over to the ops teams and it's handed over to the app dev folks and it's handed over to your SRE teams. It looks the same no matter where you are. And that's the important thing. Engineers and ops people are going to have to absorb the differences of multiple platforms. There's just no way around it. But the app dev teams are where, that's where the line has to be drawn in a modern application platform so that their experiences are the same, because we want those app dev teams spending as much time as possible fulfilling mission. We don't want them having to learn the eccentricities of an S3 bucket versus a Google Cloud Storage bucket. We don't want them having to program at that level against an API. We want them to be able to abstract all of that into a consistent platform so the application works no matter where I deploy it without changing its code. That's what Anthos is. One workflow for all your workloads. Consistency is difficult. None of these problems are news to probably anyone listening in. IT, governance and compliance, it's hard. It's hard to do once. It's much harder to do dozens of times or hundreds of times across multiple clouds. Managing configuration in and of itself, there's an entire industry that makes billions of dollars a year just doing that. And the SRE roles, ensuring consistency, root cause and remediation. The nightmare scenario that I talk about with customers, the thing that really scares you or should keep you up at night when you're deploying applications across multiple clouds, is if your application spans your on-prem data center and your cloud, and you're sort of load balancing between the two, that stretch cluster that we all pined and wanted for years. Well, if it goes sideways and every application eventually has issues, that on-prem data center is going to act and feel and look and be troubleshot in a completely different way than the cloud data center. And that difference, that bifurcation of your application is painful when you're looking to fix a problem when it's happening, or if you're looking for a root cause analysis. It's a huge problem in our industry. And a lot of people just sort of gloss over it, and it doesn't do us a service. So having that application, having it so that your application sends logs in the same way no matter where you are, having it so that the metrics look consistent no matter where you are, have it so that application tracing and circuit breaking and all those things work the same way no matter where you are, is incredibly important when you're running application productions at scale. And that's what we strive for with Anthos. So single pane of glass, and I hate saying that phrase because it's a horrible buzzword, but it's the one that we've got. Excuse me. What Anthos is you can deploy GKE, you can deploy Kubernetes clusters, and you can deploy all of the additional applications that make those clusters effective, config management, service meshes, all that fun stuff. You can deploy them all across multiple places, and they all roll up into the GCP control panel. So you can go look at a GCP cluster, go look at an on-prem cluster. You're looking in the same place. They send their logs back to the same place. They all go through Google Cloud Logging. They all use Google's metrics platform, what we used to call Stackdriver. They all send their metrics up into one place. They all roll up into Google Cloud for consumption. So multi-cloud edge orchestration, again, software built stack, just trying to sum up the last few minutes of me rambling. Defining everything in software is of paramount importance. I haven't mentioned open source in 8 minutes, but we should, because that's the only way you get software that is of the quality Kubernetes is as quickly as we've gotten it with Kubernetes. Think about it. Kubernetes is not 7 years old yet. So it has not gone through one hardware refresh in most data centers. and we're running global workloads on it. It's an amazing story. How quick Kubernetes began, how fast it developed, and how quickly it became production ready. And then abstracting away that infrastructure, like I said, the application shouldn't have to know whether it's on Amazon or Google or VMware. That just shouldn't be a way we design our applications. We have to get past that. We have to get over that. So unified experience. Just want to put this out there. I'm not going to belittle. I'm not going to drive through this entire slide. But building an application platform means thinking about multiple personas. And persona is one of those words that is thrown around a lot these days. And I wanted to just acknowledge that's the way we think about everything inside Anthos. These three roles, security, infrastructure, and then developer and DevOps, the app operator. When we're building out tooling for Anthos, these are some of the personas we think about. We also think about the SRE team a lot. The people that are looking to make sure this thing stays alive and stays healthy. And we're also looking increasingly at application owners. So the management side, rolling up, making it possible to create solid reporting, making it able to have approval workflows. That owners of applications can be those break checkpoints, virtualizing the old change control boards and making them more efficient is something that we're looking into these days a lot. It's something that a lot of customers have been asking for. But thinking around those personas and making sure that we're accounting for what they need. We don't want to have a very security-centric page inside Anthos, and then design it for an infrastructure operator to use, because it's not going to do what they need it to do. So everything we do inside Anthos, we do with these personas in mind. I mentioned a couple minutes ago where I said, logging goes into GCP, metrics go into GCP, all this information gets rolled up into this one pane of glass. And how do you do that securely? Because that is a huge amount of potentially sensitive information that we're getting in there that we're sending across a pipe. And if you have a VPN connection or a direct connection to Google, that helps that out immensely. But a lot of people don't. They just don't have that need. So inside Kubernetes, so inside any Kubernetes cluster deployed with Anthos, there's something called the GKE Connect agent. We don't add a lot of services to Kubernetes. We don't add a lot of custom controllers or what some people call operators. We don't add a lot of them to a Kubernetes cluster. But this is one of them we do put in there by default inside Anthos. And this is the way for Google to make sure that secure information is coming back home to give you the level of operation you need, but making sure that it's all encrypted properly and making sure that you don't have to manage that. Because we don't want to give you yet another set of keys to manage, because that's not helpful. So we take care of that inside the Connect agent. We manage all the encryption, make sure that it's all industry standard, and that everything in or out of that cluster coming into Google is as encrypted and unintelligible to outside people as it can be. GitOps. Ron, keep me honest on time here. I don't remember when we started, and I don't want to run over. So just keep me honest if you can on time. A couple of the things that we have inside Anthos that we take and add to Kubernetes to take the project that is Kubernetes and give you the product that is Anthos. One of the ones that I'm a huge fan of is something called Anthos Config Management. And what ACM, or Anthos Config Management, does is, well, I guess the name of a big part of what it does is right there on the label. It's a config management tool that gets deployed as part of your Kubernetes cluster in Anthos. Essentially what you have is one or more repositories, and there's actually a relatively new feature in ACM that lets an ACM, a cluster subscribe to ACM, look at multiple repos to get its configuration. But you get a prescriptive Git repository. So you get a set of directories you create in the repository and a way to name files, and it takes about 20 minutes to read the docs on how to get started with it. And there's a controller deployed into your Anthos cluster that goes out and reads that repo. So if you want to create a namespace on 300 Kubernetes clusters across 2 different clouds in your VMware infrastructure, that can be a pain. Something as simple as creating a namespace. But with ACM, you go and make a commit, you add a file or a couple of files, depending on what you're doing, to one repository. And when you push those changes up to the branch that you've specified, all of the clusters that are subscribed to that repository read those changes and make them for you. And you can do way more than just create namespaces, obviously. Security policies are part of it. All sorts of workflows. OPA Gatekeeper is configured as part of Anthos, is built into Anthos Config Management. So you can write really, really granular security policies for your clusters, and it's all maintained in a Git repository for all of the clusters that you subscribe to it. Incredibly powerful tool. I'm really bullish on it. Just some more slide just sort of explaining how it works. So you have one repository, but you can subscribe multiple clusters to that repository. So you could have a repo for dev or repo for staging, however you want to break it apart. It's a really powerful tool. A minute or two in how that policy management works. If OPA Gatekeeper is not something that you're using or have heavily investigated, inside Kubernetes, it's something that you really want to get on as quickly as you can. OPA Gatekeeper, especially with the just announced deprecation or impending deprecation of pod security policies in Kubernetes, OPA Gatekeeper is really how you're going to handle security policies at scale inside Kubernetes. So heads up, if that's something that's not currently on your plate for 2021, you really should have it on your plate. And it does things like it makes sure MTLS is turned on. It does things like access control. It creates really, really interesting rule sets. There was a big vulnerability announced in Kubernetes just before the holidays, where essentially the design of Kubernetes could allow people by default to create objects in Kubernetes that could do bad things. And I don't want to get into the details because it gets pretty pedantic, but the biggest vulnerability in Kubernetes history can be completely mitigated with OPA Gatekeeper. Essentially, you can create policies that stop people based on their RBAC, based on the name of the namespace that you're in, based on really anything that you can think of. You can write these very specific, very fine-grained policies for the security of your cluster. And those policies can be distributed using Anthos Config Management. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, if you look, this is something we were talking about in 2018. This is in production and functional and GA'd sometime, quite a while ago, but it is still one of the coolest, most powerful tools inside the Kubernetes ecosystem. This is just an example of what one of those ACM repos would look like. And you can see there are files, audit namespaces, just the way it works. It being a Git repository means it very easily integrates with CD pipelines. So making those changes trigger workflows, having workflows trigger these changes works incredibly easily, because at the end of the day, you just have to speak Git, and you just have to put the right file in the right place with the right content. If Anthos Service Mesh is Google's opinion of Istio, and it is part of an Anthos deployment by default. Service meshes, I know, still get a bad rap these days. I'm one of them that sometimes gives them a bad rap. But when you're talking about managing clusters across multiple platforms, when you're talking about federating clusters together effectively, service meshes do things that nothing else can do. And that's just it. That's just the way it goes. Anthos Service Mesh is effectively Google's opinion on how to deploy Istio. And Istio is the industry leader in service meshes for Kubernetes. I'm not going to get down into the examples too much because it does all sorts of, it gets down into really crazy examples and all sorts of wild stuff. But what we have is essentially the ability to make sure communications between applications inside Kubernetes are encrypted properly. We have the ability to set really, really powerful, really fine-grained network policies where we can do load sharding, we can do circuit breaking, we do all those things that you really have to compile into the application if you're not using a service mesh. Tracing through applications, and again, just thinking through that problem. If I have 500 pods deployed into 10 different Kubernetes clusters, inside Google, inside GCP, and I'm fronting a single URL on a single load balancer, and 1 out of every 500 requests acts funny, tracing that through that rat's nest of connections is really hard. Istio, turning on that tracing in Istio is actually really easy. And then, of course, properly handling ingress and egress is sort of the most basic functionality of a service mesh, and federating those applications together effectively. So ingress control, just kind of thumbing through this.
Hey, Jamie?
Yeah,
Jamie,
go ahead, Ron.
I would try and spend another like 5-6 minutes on, if you can, just think about summarizing some of the major key initiatives of Anthos and how it could be deployed, even if someone isn't currently an Anthos customer.
Yeah, that's coming up, I believe.
Okay.
Awesome. So just sort of putting a bow on top of Anthos Service Mesh, another really interesting feature inside Istio that is really hard to do without a service mesh is fault injection. And we all hear, in the industry talking about, you hear about Chaos Monkey and the stuff they do at Netflix to intentionally break things to make sure things are working effectively. Well, you can do that inside Istio with a couple of lines or a couple of lines in a config file. You can introduce latency across those connections. So suddenly a connection that typically takes 2 milliseconds for one application to talk to another suddenly takes 5,000. And you can watch how your application responds to that. Fault injection at the network level is probably one of the most common failures that we have in our industry. You always blame the network. If you don't get to blame DNS, you definitely blame the network. And being able to do that programmatically inside your cluster to make sure that the applications act as they should when those conditions do inevitably arise is an important thing. And it's something that's really hard to test without a tool like Istio, without a tool like Anthos Service Mesh. So how does Service Mesh help? I'm not going to spend too much time there. Uniform observability, again, that's the same kind of thing. Tracing SLOs and error budgets and all those things that SREs love. SRE teams love service meshes. Operations teams tend to love them a little less because they're the people, configuring them and making changes to them. Getting through these slides real quick. Policy-driven security. Service auth. Again, this is all stuff that is built into Istio out of the box that you can take advantage of. So Ron, where are we on time? How much? About 5 minutes? I guess about 4 minutes now.
Yes, that's correct, Jamie.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure. So kind of just touching on Cloud Run, and we'll run through here real fast. Knative is a serverless library or serverless framework on top of Kubernetes. Using Knative inside GKE when you're using Anthos in VMware or Anthos on bare metal or inside Kubernetes. So Cloud Run is our implementation of Knative, and we also have a hosted version of Cloud Run that's a little bit different, at least on the back end. But serverless is really powerful. Sometimes you don't need all of that YAML and all those configs. Sometimes you just have a container image and want to deploy your application. And That's where something like Knative comes in. Taking a look, just as the example, to deploy a hello world application in Kubernetes takes this many lines. This is valid YAML to deploy an application in Kubernetes. To deploy the same application on Cloud Run, the serverless framework, it's one line. gcloud run deploy hello service, and you tell it which container image to run. It takes care of the rest of it for you. It abstracts the rest of Kubernetes away, and you just tell it to run your image. It handles scaling, it handles storage, it handles exposing it to the world. You just tell it the image to run, and you're done. Not quite as flexible as Kubernetes, but sometimes you don't need all the flexibility, right? It's all about that pendulum. It's all about finding that happy middle ground for your application. So, gcloud run on GKE. All right. So to wrap that up, to kind of summarize all of that we've built Anthos to be the application platform for any containerized application, no matter where you deploy it. So the idea is that getting to a container platform for a lot of customers is still a challenge, and we want you focused on modernizing the application. We don't want you to have to focus on 5 different ways to deploy Kubernetes depending on where you are. So modernizing wherever you are, giving you that consistent experience. Avoiding lock-in, and I know it's a vendor telling you that it helps you avoid vendor lock, but it is one of the more important things about Anthos is that it is all built solely on top of the open source bits. The only time where we really roll our own code inside there is that connect agent that lets you phone home, that phones home that data. That's sort of Google in-house built code. But Knative is an open source project. Istio is an open source project. Kubernetes, obviously, an open source project. And we're not adding 14 layers of stuff, middleware, on top of those open source projects. We're taking them, we're making sure that the configuration will handle Google scale workloads, and then we're presenting them to our customers. So we're giving you the most effective, most cost-effective, way to deploy sort of lean and mean Kubernetes across as many places as we can. And that's the goal of Anthos, is to get Kubernetes up and running and get it functional as quickly as possible with the least overhead. And that's kind of where we are. There are thousands of new features inside Anthos on any given month. They can help you solve any number of challenges more effectively, and I don't want to dive down into those change logs. But if those are questions, like if you have a question, can Anthos do something for me? Can Anthos make my life easier in this way? Feel free to reach out. The easiest way to get a hold of me is that Twitter handle there at the bottom. The easiest way to give Anthos a test drive is to go to cloud.google.com. There's actually an Anthos deployment, a sample deployment inside the Google Marketplace, inside Google Cloud. It deploys in about 5 minutes, and you get a functional Anthos cluster with the bells and whistles turned on, and you can go see what you get out of the box on top of Kubernetes to make it that kind of platform that you need. And with that, I think that's about it. Thanks a lot for the time, folks.